Hi there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're taking yet another retrospective look, this time at the album from Rhye, titled Woman. Now, I mentioned way back in my review of Janelle Monáe's The Electric Lady that R&B just doesn't tend to work as well with me as other genres, and for a long time I've been struggling to try to figure out why. Well, I think I might have finally have something of a finger on it. I'm going to try to articulate that opinion as best I can without offending anybody. So here it goes. R&B tends to work more on the stimulations of the emotions rather than on the stimulation of the mind per se. It's the difference between a great comedy film and a great art house drama. They both can be fantastic movies worthy of critical acclaim, but they're both looking to appeal to very different parts of the human spirit, and their methods of appeal should not be used to denigrate the quality if they work effectively. And for me, I'll admit that music that has a more literate feel tends to stick with me a little bit better than songs that are just trying to tug on my heartstrings, even though those can work too. But then again, the more I think about that, the more I realize that most of the music I love triggers a visceral emotional response regardless of any written content. So it's got to be more than that. I think, part of my problem comes down to subject matter and presentation. If you're looking at R&B, you're going to get various permutations of songs about love and relationships, and with few exceptions, you don't really get a lot outside of that. Now, that's not precisely a bad thing, providing the presentation is unique and interesting enough and that the songwriting and delivery is still strong. These sorts of songs can still trigger that same positive or negative, powerful emotional reaction, and it just might be harder for me to articulate why they work for me in the same way. It's not a matter of reinventing the wheel or blowing my mind with high concept theses about the human condition, though I tend to prefer that kind of music, that's just me. It's about refining and perfecting material till it triggers the strongest possible emotive response from its listener. Okay, I can get behind listening to something like that and trying to judge music on that standard. So, with that in mind, I decided to take a look at the mysterious duo Rhye that received some rave reviews earlier this year for their debut album titled Woman, and I figured it'd be an apt test for my hypothesis here. Did the album manage to work for me? Oh boy, okay, this is actually going to be a fairly interesting album to talk about, but not for the reasons that you're probably thinking. And I think the best way for me to appropriately articulate how I feel regarding this album is to describe how exactly I listened to it. Now, this might not mirror your experience. Hell, I highly doubt it mirrors your experience. But then again, I suspect this might have been the case for at least a few people. That being said, this is also one of those odd cases where I don't think this review will have a huge amount of value outside of just me finding a way to contextualize my opinion. So just keep that in mind when you decide to judge me based upon it. So keep in mind that I started listening to this particular album knowing absolutely nothing about this duo, not knowing their identities or any of their previous history, nothing. And once I finished listening to the album, I was, for the most part, very impressed. I dug the minimalist and sparse production. I really just loved the accompanying strings that had just the right timbre to send a chill down my spine. I wasn't as big of a fan of the horns, but they worked well enough in the mix at certain points. And as for the lyrics, well, I wouldn't precisely call them great or all that special or memorable, and they're not within spitting distance of Janelle Monáe's intricately constructed sci-fi R&B experiment earlier this year, but then again, they weren't trying to be. This is an album about romantic intimacy and simplicity, quiet sensuality, and all about the little subtleties that can't always be appropriately articulated using words. It was beautiful and really quite engaging, and the best part of the experience were the vocals, soft, ethereal, almost a whisper, and filled with emotive presence that really got to me. The girl's voice has put me in mind of James Blake at his absolute best, and I was all set to give some serious accolades to the woman fronting this duo. Except, during further research, I discovered that the lead singer is a guy. Canadian contralto known as Mike Meloche, living in LA, happily married to a girl named Alexa. And since I'm behind the curve by about 8 months, this was apparently the same discovery a bunch of other people made back in March when this album came out. Okay, so here's the thing. Initially, I was kind of bothered by this. I mean, Meloche sounds so much like a woman in the vein of Sadie, and the songs seem to have a distinctly feminine vibe that I couldn't help but feel a little bit misled, particularly considering how much of the emotional appeal of this act is how sensual and how erotic some of the songs came off to be. So Then again, perhaps maybe I'm a victim of my own gender biases, and I would never have expected a man to create music in this vein. But then I thought, wait a minute, I'm perfectly comfortable in my own sexuality, and I can admit that there are plenty of songs written and performed by men that I find incredibly hot. Take Usher's Climax, one of the best songs he's ever made, and one of my favorite hit songs of last year. I thought that song was sexy as hell. It really worked for me. But then on the other hand, I could always tell that it was Usher singing that song. Definitely that he was a guy. Even going back to listen to Rhye on some occasions, I still find it a little hard to believe that the voice is male. And then the other thought occurred to me, dude, does it even matter? The music is still sensual and erotic as all hell, so why should the gender matter? Take the artist out of the equation, just focus on the music. Well, here's where we run into part of my fundamental precepts regarding music and art. The artist informs the art. I've always tried to keep in mind authorial intent when I try to expose myself to any sort of artwork, be it albums, paintings, or movies, or video games. The trick's seeing how well the artist executes that intent. Now, there's a fine line to this because art should still be able to stand on its own and display its purpose and authorial intent effectively without artists stepping in through interviews or additional commentaries to fully explain themselves. But then again, at its very core, authorial intent should inform the work, and it strikes me as irresponsible to not consider it. I've never bought into death of the author, so let's continue going with that. In that mind, I think I've managed to come to something of a conclusion regarding my bigger problem with Rhye. The gender identity, it's never been the issue. It's the deception that's the problem. Let's be blunt. As much as Rhye tend toward privacy and building hype with mystery as they did throughout 2012, the controversy surrounding Malash's vocals, it had to be intentional. No act is that incredibly myopic to ignore that possibility here. I mean, why did they only bother to put the issue to rest after months of heated debate and allow people to actually bring up speculations that the vocals were coming from a girl? It's this element that just comes across as disingenuous to me. And while the rational part of my mind would say, okay, just look past it, the more emotional stirrings that Rhye tried to evoke, they just feel a little undercut to me. That sort of dishonesty is an absolute killer for me when you're trying to make the songs come across as romantic as these. And every time I've listened through the album since, I just can't help but feel more and more distant, as the appeal just doesn't work for me in the same way. Look, let me stress this, that it's not the gender switch that really bothered me. It's the need that they had this need to conceal the switch at all, that they weren't honest and straightforward about it. Honesty for me is always the fundamental core of relationships, and the fact that honesty was never present in their initial intent, that really got on my nerves. So, okay, why did I spend so much time talking about this little issue that I have rather than talking about the music itself? Well, mostly because there isn't a lot on this album to really talk about. The album is incredibly minimalist, drawing all of the focus onto the vocals, which I will admit they still sound extremely beautiful. There are a few moments where I feel the production is a little bit cluttered, and I don't think the horns work nearly as well as the strings do with Malash's vocals, but then again, that's just matters of synergy. Now, a bigger problem, however, comes up in the lyrics, mostly because while they are mostly effective, there isn't a lot here that's all that special or memorable or that's gonna really stick with me. Open and Major Minor Love are probably the most interesting songs lyrically on the album, but then again, that's not saying much. I mean, for God's sake, the title track is just Malash cooing the word woman as essentially as he possibly can over and over again. And look, for me, it just reminded me of the opening track from the third Eddie Murphy album, and if you've heard that track, you completely understand where I'm coming from, and I just couldn't take in the atmosphere at all. In the end, oh man, I wanted to like this album more than I do, because Rhye's Woman is beautiful and striking and incredibly sensual, and yet it didn't completely come together for me. Maybe if you check it out with the full knowledge of what you're getting into, you'll have a better listening experience than I did. As I said, it's not the gender flip that bothers me in the slightest. It's the fact that they were so coy about it. And they worked to deceive their audience for months, and for no other reasons other than it just to be a deception. To draw a film comparison here, I'm somewhat reminded of J.J. Abrams' mystery box concept a little bit, using mystery and deception to drive the narrative and drive the hype, and when you open up the mystery box, there's not much there worth talking about. And I kind of get that same feeling when talking about Rhye and this album. Still, I would be very wrong to deny that what is here is extremely good. And if you can get invested in the emotional resonance of the tracks, it can be extremely compelling. Hell, when I didn't know about the lead singer, I was all set to give this album a rave review. Now, knowing that I've been deceived and even going back and listening to it a couple of times, it just doesn't click with me in the same way, and it's a 7 out of 10 for me, but I will give it a recommendation. Look, if you're looking for music to make sweet, sweet love to, you really should check out Rhye. Just remember, kids, the important thing is being aware of the situation you're getting yourself into, in more ways than one. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like for me to cover, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. Yes, I'm going to be talking about MIA in a few episodes. I've got to get through the rest of her discography first, fully do some catch up there, and I want to talk about the Flower Kings first. So until then, see you next time.